Hello everyone, and welcome to TBR's webinar, Rise of the Alternative Network Provider, Disrupting the Telecom Business Model. I'm Justin Surgeon, and I'm hosting today's session. Incumbent telecom operators in the U.S. face a new category of competitors that play by a different set of rules. These alternative network providers, including companies such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon, aim to disrupt the traditional telecom business model by lowering access costs and improving the user experience. Their motives differ from incumbent telcos, with focus on monetizing their connectivity solutions. Rather, these alternative network providers view access as a sunk cost necessary to drive their own initiatives, such as digital advertising and e-commerce. The stakes are high because these market dynamics will shift the balance of power, money, and landscape makeup in coming years. Only the strongest and most nimble incumbent operators will survive the coming shakeout. Today's webinar, Rise of the Alternative Network Provider, Disrupting the Telecom Business Model, will touch on findings from our Alternative Network Providers Market Landscape Report. Senior Analyst Chris Antlitz will share his perspectives on the changes in the telecom market brought forth by the entrance of alternative network providers. Before I pass this over to Chris, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel and to watch this presentation or any of the others we have posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the material we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. We'll address them at the end of the webinar or reach out directly to any of us to set up a discussion. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides, as well as our thought leadership pieces, other webinars, and commentaries on SlideShare at slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. Now let me introduce the analyst presenting today. Chris Antlitz is a senior analyst in TBR's telecom practice and specializes in telecom vendor research and leads TBR's telecom infrastructure services research portfolio. Chris covers network infrastructure vendors including Alcatel-Lucent, Cisco, Ericsson, Juniper, Nokia Networks, Samsung, Huawei, and ZTE, as well as the telecom mobility initiatives of leading IT and software companies. He also assists with TBR's coverage of service providers, including wireless, wireline, and cable operators, and leverages his years of analytical experience since 2008 to provide critical insight and analysis in syndicated and project work. And with that, let me hand this over to Chris.
Thanks, Justin, and welcome, everyone. Before we jump into the material, I just want to give a framework for how we're getting to this information and some of the research streams that we do here at TBR that feed into this market landscape. So this diagram here is the telecom practice portfolio here at TBR. Just want to highlight quickly that we do research on the telecom vendor space, telecom operators, and then we have market research. And outside of those three main categories, we branch off and deep dive into a variety of different subsegments of this market, the broader telecom market. And then alternative network providers is one of those segments that we're deep diving into. So some of the coverage we have here at TBR, we cover all of the Tier 1 telecom equipment vendors. We also cover the 4 Tier 1 U.S. operators and many of the leading enterprise operator companies. We also put out a series of benchmarks every quarter on the telecom infrastructure services market. That's an area of specialization here at TBR. We do put out multiple reports on that market. We also have a U.S. and Canada mobile operator benchmark and a carrier cloud benchmark where we look at all of the leading operators globally that have a cloud business, and we get some very good insights into what they're doing there. And all of these reports, as well as the cable operator reports, this information, these research streams that we have at TBR are feeding into our ability to do reports on this new topic area, which is alternative network providers. So the alternative network providers, this research stream, it's one of 4 research streams we're doing right now at TBR. 4 really interesting topic areas that we've identified and we're doing market landscapes on. So we have the alternative network providers as one of them, also network function virtualization, small cells, and 5G. These reports are looking at, they're subject-specific market overview reports that are looking at key findings, market sizing, customer adoption, operator positioning and strategies, geographic adoption, vendor positioning and strategies, acquisition and alliance strategies and opportunities. And one more thing I'd like to note is that we are doing, for the alternative network providers market landscape, deep dive drill downs into the CapEx of the web scale companies. So what we're doing is taking each of the leading web scale companies, taking their reported CapEx and breaking it down across all the major spend areas. So we are actually, we have enough research now where we can, with high level of confidence, determine how much they're spending on data center equipment, how much they're spending on various network technologies like Wi-Fi, optical transport, et cetera, et cetera. So very interesting information that we're able to glean there. And at the bottom of this slide is our published schedule. So we're doing 2 market landscapes each quarter, and they're alternating. So these are semi-annual reports. So with that, let's jump right into the presentation here. So the balance of power is shifting in the telecom market. We've got the incumbent operators on the left-hand side, and we have the alternative network providers. This is just some of them on the right-hand side. And the balance of power is shifting towards non-traditional telecom operators, specifically content, internet, cloud, and Wi-Fi companies. Now, when I say the balance of power is shifting, the dollars are shifting towards these companies. The growth is shifting towards these companies. The market influence and value is shifting towards these companies. These are big things. This is a big deal. And we're going to be uncovering through this presentation what specifically is going on here, what the business models are, what the implications are, and what the stakeholders involved in this market can do to be successful. So before we get into those business models, let's just identify what is an alternative network provider. So it's any company that is offering telecommunications services as a sunk cost to indirectly drive its core business, which can include digital advertising, cloud, retail, and content. There's more business models, but these are the main ones that we're going to be looking at, especially today. And just to keep in mind here, we're throwing Wi-Fi first operators into this mix, even though their core business is to monetize access. The reason we're including Wi-Fi first operators here is because they're able to provide service very comparable to cell service at a much reduced rate compared to current offerings on the market. So it is very disruptive, even though they are going after the access route. All right, so now that we have a level set here, let's look at the traditional model and the alternative model. Needless to say, the traditional model is being disrupted. We're at the very early stages of this, but there are some things that we can extrapolate given what we've been seeing in the marketplace. So first of all, monetizing access. This is a key cornerstone of the traditional business model for a telecom operator. Well, for the alternative network operator, monetizing digital ads, cloud, retail, and content is more important, and giving away the access for free or close to free is just part of doing business. So essentially what's happening is, by giving away the access, the alternative network provider is indirectly driving revenue of their core business, which tends to be high-margin businesses in the areas of e-commerce, cloud, et cetera. So second thing, traditional model, own and control end-to-end network infrastructure. Incumbent operators like to own the value chain, and they want to own as many elements of the network as possible so that they have that control. And that's great. I mean, that has worked, that model, but the model's changing. Now what we're seeing is leveraging existing infrastructure and owning and controlling where necessary. So more of a partnership ecosystem is developing where we have alternative network providers either providing core pieces of that network infrastructure, or they're using a variety of partners in this patchwork so that they can provide these, deliver these services. Third on the traditional model is owning the value chain and partnering where necessary. Telecom operators want to So we always talk about OTT and how telcos are being disintermediated by OTT. Well, now they're being disintermediated on the access. So this is their core business, is selling the access. So now we're talking about OTT for access, essentially. And the alternative model is embracing open source and building an ecosystem around that. So we have companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon working on open standards, building their infrastructure around that, building their applications platforms, these ecosystems that are building, that are blossoming around the platforms that they have, and that is the new model now. That's the model that the industry is shifting towards. They just happen to be shifting towards it at a very fast rate. Last but not least is must support legacy. This is something that is a crutch for incumbent telecom operators. Legacy infrastructure is relatively expensive to maintain. It's a crutch to carry the burden of maintaining this infrastructure. And with all the next-gen technologies out there, legacy is being disrupted at every way you look at it. You have DSLs being disrupted by fiber. On the wireless end, LTE now is the de facto technology. So there needs to be this shift, this rapid shift, and it's very difficult for the telcos to do this. Meanwhile, the alternative network providers are implementing these cutting-edge technologies from inception. This is giving them a market advantage. So companies like Google that are doing their fiber initiative, they're putting out FTTH. You have a company like AT&T who's got all these legacy copper lines out there, copper to the house. It's extremely expensive for them to reclaim that copper, drop new fiber, et cetera, et cetera. They have to manage through that migration cycle, and that's expensive. It's expensive to transform. And, this is where we say only the most nimble operators will survive this, because it's going to require a lot of capital, a lot of planning, and they need to take a hard look at their strategies as they make this migration. Okay, so we're seeing the market evolve within the alternative network provider space. We're seeing the market evolve around three categories. These are really three business models if you break it down. So first is Wi-Fi, second is advertising, and third is cloud. We're going to look at each of these in depth going forward right now. So starting with Wi-Fi, we're seeing Wi-Fi become an alternative to cellular. Before, Wi-Fi was viewed as inferior to cellular, but there have been some technological advancements in Wi-Fi that have made that service much better, much more improved compared to cellular. And things in handover technology, coordination, authentication. There are improvements here that are making the quality of service on Wi-Fi almost as good as on cellular. This is hugely disruptive. So what we're seeing happen is we're seeing Wi-Fi first plus cellular, and we're seeing Wi-Fi only models starting to emerge in the marketplace. So let's do the comparison between the traditional model, which is cellular only, and the alternative model, which includes this Wi-Fi. The cellular-only model is relatively expensive. You need to use licensed spectrum, which is very costly, as anybody has seen in the recent AWS-3 spectrum auction. And there's CapEx plus OpEx is relatively high to build into these frequency bands. You need to have the RAN, the backhaul infrastructure going around that. It's expensive. Wi-Fi is relatively inexpensive to own and operate, and there's several reasons for this. One is it uses unlicensed spectrum, free spectrum. It's utilizing existing Wi-Fi hotspots and backhaul. So typically, there'll be hotspots in public venues or within the households. There's well over 10 million hotspots in the United States alone if you include the residential Wi-Fi. And if you consider that most traffic is generated from the household, more than 70%, that's a big pool of traffic that's originating from the household anyway. Well, if you're already covered with Wi-Fi, it's a no-brainer to send that traffic over the Wi-Fi network. And those cost savings are passed on to the subscribers by doing that. Second on the traditional model is traffic is being monetized. So here again, monetizing the access. On the alternative model, content, retail, advertisements, and cellular could be monetized. So the reason cellular I have there being monetized, if you look at companies like Republic Wireless and look at their business model, they're an MVNO of Sprint. So they do Wi-Fi first. So essentially what happens is they will give you that access to the Wi-Fi to do the calling and texting and data through the Wi-Fi network, any terminal, any access point that you have access to. And then wherever you don't have coverage, it backtracks to the Sprint network to carry that traffic. So you have contiguous coverage. They built a business model around that, and they actually monetize essentially you could look at it as a prepaid offering where they're selling minutes or data buckets from Sprint, reselling that, and they're making a margin off of that, and they're throwing away the Wi-Fi access for free. This is hugely disruptive, especially when you factor in that most of the traffic is going through the household where there happens to be Wi-Fi access points already. Third is optimized and seamless user experience. So as I said, there's improvements being made in handover and coordination technology, making the service good enough in comparison to cellular. Fourth is outdoor coverage is pervasive. Indoor is challenged for cellular. Now we're seeing small cells starting to come indoors. Well, guess what? There's already Wi-Fi indoors, and it's pervasive. If you look at residential, if you look at commercial buildings. So for the alternative model, outdoor coverage has the big gaps, but indoor is pervasive. So if you have a Wi-Fi only or Wi-Fi first model, it's a compelling offering for a subscriber where they're usually in a Wi-Fi hotspot zone anyway. And then last but not least here is optimized traffic management. This is one thing that is going well for cellular. The policy control and the dedicated line access, the fundamentals of having licensed service is superior to Wi-Fi, but the improvements are definitely being made. You know, I was just on the phone with a person from T-Mobile out in California this morning, and he made a note that we were talking about Wi-Fi, and he told me halfway through the conversation, oh, by the way, I'm on speakerphone and I'm talking through Wi-Fi. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. I said, the voice quality was excellent. He didn't drop a call. The voice was crisp. It was a clean sounding. And I said, I told him, I said, look, if this is what Wi-Fi calling is, the cellular guys better watch out because this is hugely disruptive and just something to keep in mind. So Wi-Fi is the lowest cost, highest impact way to deliver wireless connectivity. We see this as being a huge disruptor, especially in the United States market. We are seeing Wi-Fi gaining traction elsewhere in Europe, but the U.S. is the most dynamic market for this ecosystem right now. And it is definitely giving cellular a run for its money, or it will, in a much bigger way going forward. Okay, so as I said, the Wi-Fi ecosystem is dynamic and it's growing rapidly. There are 6 points that I want to cover here that are things to keep in mind. First and foremost is the Cable Wi-Fi Alliance. Now, this is a consortium of the top 5 cable operators in the United States. Back in May 2012, they all got together and said, hey, we've been building out these Wi-Fi networks ourselves, you know, for various reasons, to reduce churn, to improve the user experience, to do their multi-screen enablement, all these different factors. They said, hey, what if we all get together and combine our footprints? And that's what they did. So they started that in 2012 with 50,000 hotspots. These are public hotspots. These are not including the residential hotspots that they already have. So 50,000. They have over 300,000 hotspots out now in the market. They're covering entire cities across the country, and they have these hotspots in some major suburban areas as well. Honestly, I see this as the precursor for Wi-Fi only plans. I see the cable operators becoming very big players in Wi-Fi first or Wi-Fi only. They're going to be going toe-to-toe with the cellular operators. and that ties into freewheel. So for those of you who have not heard of freewheel yet, this is an offering that came out from Cablevision last month. And essentially what it is a Wi-Fi only plan where you get unlimited talk, text, and data on any Wi-Fi access point that you have access to. And if you are a Cablevision internet subscriber, this offering is free. If you are not a Cablevision subscriber, this service costs $30 a month. So either way, this is hugely disruptive because even if you're paying $30 a month, the lowest plans that you can get from T-Mobile and Sprint right now, even from the price war, don't even come close to that. So we're talking some significant disruption here, and we're at the very early stages. Freewheel I'm using as an example because this is the first official Wi-Fi service provided by a cable operator. I can say that Comcast, if anybody read their transcript from last quarter's earnings, they were talking about Wi-Fi, their own Wi-Fi service. They are doing this too. And when they get Time Warner Cable, they're going to have even more scale to play with and make this service very compelling. Third point here, Wi-Fi first plus cellular model. As I said, Republic Wireless and others are optimizing coverage gaps by using cellular where necessary. And the business model is built around the premise that the majority of the traffic is going to emanate from residential or commercial settings. So this business model is viable for them. And again, they're monetizing not the Wi-Fi, but the cellular prepaid package that they're selling in conjunction with the Wi-Fi. Fourth here is retail. So here's a different model. We have retailers and food and beverage companies that offer hotspots in their stores, and they've been doing this for years. This is not really new. What's new is that it's getting bigger. There's more scale here. Whereas before they'd only have Wi-Fi in the highly trafficked areas, now they're being rolled out to all stores. We're seeing blanket hotspots being rolled out across footprints. And the thought process behind this is, if we offer free Wi-Fi, we're going to pull people into our stores, we're going to keep them there longer, and they're going to buy more stuff from us. That model has been working for them. And again, this is free. It's free access, and it's driving indirectly something else. This is disruptive for incumbent telcos. Fifth here is Google, who actually is also doing a Wi-Fi first type service. Last month they announced that they were going to be an MVNO of Sprint and T-Mobile, and they're going to come out with their own wireless service. They are also looking very closely at Wi-Fi and piggybacking on other Wi-Fi infrastructures and using Wi-Fi first as the preferred network and then doing a fallback to a cellular network where there's not contiguous coverage. Google's going to do this at scale is the long-term plan. And then sixth is telecom Wi-Fi. So the incumbent telecoms are not sitting on their hands while this is happening. We have some companies that are being very proactive here, like T-Mobile, who came out with their Un-carrier 5.0 a couple months ago, where they are now promoting actively people using Wi-Fi for their voice and texting and data. People have already been doing the data on Wi-Fi. That's been very prevalent. But now we're seeing voice and text going over the Wi-Fi network. That was the bread and butter of the telcos. That traffic's now going to start going more and more over the Wi-Fi network, where it's not being monetized in the same way as it was when it was going over cellular. So in a sense, the incumbent operators are disrupting themselves, because by putting out more Wi-Fi, there's less opportunities for them to monetize the cellular networks. So that was Wi-Fi. Now we're moving on to advertising. Two companies that we're going to focus on here, Google and Facebook. Two companies that generate the majority of their money from selling digital advertisements. This is going to remain their core business, but they are being very strategic now in how they're going to increase the addressable market for that business. Both companies are aiming to bring internet service to the underserved 2/3 of the world population for free or close to free. So there are 4.4 billion people on this planet that do not have internet access right now. Google and Facebook are leading initiatives where they are going to get those people internet access for free or close to free. Now, they're doing this in a couple of different ways. Google with the Google Fiber, this is the one that everybody talks a lot about. You know, a lot of buzz marketing around this. The reality of it is you're not going to deploy dedicated fiber lines to every last mile house and building across the world. That's just not going to happen. So while Google Fiber is great, and yes, they will continue to build that out, as we've been seeing in the market with the announcement of new markets, they are going other routes to meet this goal. One of those routes is Project Loon, and then they have some other ideas as well. Let's call it space furniture. So space furniture essentially means they are going to blanket the stratosphere with these technologies, and they're going to create a patchwork of essentially a coverage zone for wireless connectivity. So they're using a variety of different methods to do this that they're tinkering with right now. They're not in commercial use yet. They're in the trial stage. But they're using a variety of weather balloons, drones, blimps, satellites, et cetera, to try and do this in a low-cost, high-impact way. And the goal is to have these devices in the stratosphere working in unison so that they're providing that ubiquitous coverage. And Facebook is doing very similar things. They have spearheaded the Internet.org initiative. There are a variety of well-known companies that are part of this initiative, namely Samsung and Ericsson and MediaTek and some others. The goal of this organization is very similar to what Google is doing. It is to bring affordable internet access to everyone in the world. The CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, he says that connectivity is a human right, and he is dedicating a lot of his time and energy into this initiative because he is so passionate about it. Sergey Brin and Larry Page are doing the same. This is a big deal for these guys, and they are putting resource behind it. They are bringing some of the brightest minds in the world on board to figure out these complex problems. You know, doing what they're trying to do is no small feat, and it is going to change the world. When we look back in 10 years from now, these companies are going to change the world in what they're doing. And they're at the very early stages right now. So let's delve a little bit deeper into this. So we're talking about the access portion here, but this goes way beyond just the access, okay? We could talk about space furniture and all these other great things, but Google and Facebook are also doing things, other aspects of the internet value chain that they're looking very closely at. First and foremost is lowering device costs, not just phones, but also all other connectable devices. So we're talking about IoT. Anything that can be connected will be connected, and at low cost and at high scale. These companies are both, as part of their initiatives, are both looking at how do we get, for instance, how do we get the price of a smartphone below $100? How do we get it below $50? Okay, how do we get it to be on par with a feature phone in price? Okay, these are big deal items, especially when you consider that smartphone ASPs now are a couple $100s. So we're talking about drastic reductions in the cost of devices. This includes the modules, the chipsets, the batteries, et cetera, all the components of the devices. Second thing they're looking at is how do we make the applications more data efficient? How do we cache content closer to the user? How do we manipulate the programming so that we can optimize how the traffic is being delivered and being provisioned within the network, et cetera, et cetera. They're looking very closely at that. Reducing power costs, not only for delivering the network connectivity, so the infrastructure energy costs, but also the device energy costs. How do we improve battery life? How do we reduce the environmental footprint of those batteries that are in these devices? These are all things that they're looking very closely at. And last but not least is removing language barriers and content. Most of the content on the internet today is in English. Well, guess what? There's several billion people in this world that don't speak English, and they need dedicated content that is in their local languages. I can think of Mandarin, Cantonese, a variety of Indian languages, Arabic languages, et cetera, that they need to get these applications written in these languages. They need to get the content in these languages. They're spearheading initiatives to lower the costs, to lower the barriers of entry to get those ecosystems developed. So, if we take a step back, by tackling all of these areas in unison, the coalition efforts being spearheaded by Google and Facebook aim to remove key barriers that have hindered bringing ubiquitous internet connectivity and interaction to all the peoples of the world. So not only attacking the access, but also every other critical piece of the internet value chain. They're attacking all of these things in unison with the sole intent to remove those barriers to entry and get the access out to everyone. And how are they justifying this with stakeholders? So they are justifying these investments. Now, we're not talking chump change here. We're talking hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that just these two companies are spending annually on network infrastructure. And we have more specific numbers in the market landscape that I was alluding to before. But essentially, the more people that use the internet, the more opportunities there are for Google and Facebook to sell their digital ads. So I've got 4 screens up here. You got the smartphone, the tablet, the TV, and the computer. 4 screens. All of those screens can generate digital advertising revenue for these companies. They're a platform for getting those revenues back to these companies. So getting that connectivity out there and getting those device costs down is going to make these things go mainstream across not only the developed world, but also the emerging world. And last but not least, we're going to look at cloud. So cloud is building out the network backbone. Companies that rely on cloud are seeking to own and control more and more of the network backbone. There's a couple of reasons why they're doing this. But the point is that it's disintermediating traditional telecom operators, because traditionally it's these guys that are providing the optical transport, the CDNs, the data centers, et cetera, et cetera. They're providing those assets, and they're serving a critical part in that value chain. Well, now you have the web scale guys saying, forget this, I'm going to build my own network. And there's a variety of reasons why they're doing that. But first, let's just look at the companies here that are doing this. Amazon, Facebook, IBM, Salesforce, Google, and Microsoft. This is just a couple of ones. These are the more well-known ones that we know are doing this. They're putting money into optical transport. They're buying up dark fiber in large quantities across the world. They're laying more cables, interconnecting their data centers. Why are they doing this? So 4 reasons that I'm highlighting here. First is pushing down traffic carriage costs. So if you had 2 data centers, one in the US and one in Japan, say, and they're interconnected with a submarine cable by AT&T, you got to pay a toll to carry your traffic through that pipe. Well, what Google said is, forget this, I'm going to build my own pipe. And by doing that, they pay for the cost of it, they maintain it, but then they can ship as much traffic as they want through it, and they can own and control that. So it's boosting the network reliability, it's lowering the latency, and it's protecting the scalability of the infrastructure. So we're going to see more of this. We're seeing optical transport is the spend by web scale on optical is skyrocketing. It's going up at a double-digit rate year over year, quarter over quarter, and there are some key beneficiaries of this. We're going to talk about that later in this when we talk about the vendors and who's benefiting. Before we get there, though, let's talk about implications for telecom operators, the incumbents. Needless to say, these are negative trends for them. Starting with revenue, revenue is going to decline. Wi-Fi is going to eat into cellular revenue. The transport and the backhauling infrastructure that they're charging toll rates on is being disintermediated. They're going to come, the pricing is coming under pressure. We're already seeing this happening, especially between intercontinental tolls. On the CapEx end, The incumbents will need to continue investing high levels into CapEx to improve their services, build out their footprints, and pursue alternative businesses of their own in order to get growth, because their core business right now is under attack, and the future of it does not look very good considering what's going on here of the monetizing access portion. So they're going to need to funnel CapEx dollars into these other areas, and that's going to keep it high. Meanwhile, you got OpEx is going to be relatively stable. Traffic is going to continue to grow on their networks, even though revenues are coming down, and they're going to need to continue paying for the cost associated with that. And then last but not least here, cash flow is coming under pressure. We're seeing this in the U.S. with the price war. If you look at the operating cash flow and free cash flow of all the Tier 1 operators in the U.S., the only one that's growing is T-Mobile. The other three are falling quite substantially. And the only reason T-Mobile's is growing is because they're growing subscribers so quickly. But the other big component there is the pricing of the cell plans is coming down. So this is a tenuous situation that the operators find themselves in, and this is not a long-term, something that they can deal with long-term. Maybe the strongest ones like AT&T and Verizon can withstand this, but the smaller, weaker operators can't withstand this for an extended period of time. And these negative trends are going to be exacerbated as the alternative network providers start to gain more momentum in the marketplace. Okay, so with that said, it's not all dire for the incumbents. There are some recommendations for them. There is a way for them to stay relevant even as this market is evolving. In a nutshell, it's all about transforming the network architecture to a software-mediated platform. So what I'm talking about is NFV, SDN, cloud, and analytics, leveraging these 4 areas to transform how networks are built, how they are provisioned, how they are maintained. There are numerous reasons why this is important and why operators need to bite the bullet and roll up their sleeves and start being aggressive here. 4 key reasons are it's going to help them with their profitability. By moving to a software-mediated platform, they can bend their OpEx cost curve down. It will also bend the CapEx cost curve down over the long term, because once you have this infrastructure in place and you've taken out the old infrastructure, it's more efficient. You're using commodity hardware, open source software. It's much lower cost to operate and maintain. Also, it's going to make it more flexible, speed up the time to market, and help the operators adapt more quickly to market changes and user preferences. All of these things are critical for them to be nimble as this market changes very quickly. So, and another thing to keep in mind, the incumbent operators have something going in their favor as well. They have some advantages over the alternative network providers, namely security, bundled deals, they have one-source billing, they have customer care. These things will appeal to certain customers, including government, enterprise, and a subset of consumers. So really what we're talking about with the alternative network providers, the portion of the business that is most under threat is a subset of the consumers. Those are the ones that are going to be the first to jump ship and start using these alternative carriers. So that's the area of the business that is going to see the most churn going forward here. Okay, implications for network vendors. So here's where we get a little interesting here. So all this competition is good for the network vendors. They're coming out ahead here. Web-scale companies comprise more than 20% of total revenue for some vendors already. Juniper, Ciena, and Infinera are the ones I'm referring to there. And the revenues are growing rapidly for other vendors as well. Cisco, Alcatel-Lucent, Ericsson, Aruba, and Ruckus, and other suppliers. They're all noting that web-scale is becoming a much greater proportion of their total revenue. So what we've plotted here on this 2x2 is the relative opportunities to sell into alternative network providers on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis, current exposure to alternative network providers. And we plotted the top 14 vendors here, and you'll notice that Juniper, Ruckus, Ciena, and Infinera are standouts. They're the most ahead in selling into these companies and driving that engagement with these companies, and they also have very strong growth opportunities with these companies. Again, it's mostly around optical transport, but also for Juniper, it's about core routers and switches. However, there are very strong opportunities for some vendors here, Ericsson, Cisco, and Alcatel-Lucent in particular. We see addressable services and software and other solutions that these companies can help alternative network providers with, namely software-mediated technologies. There's huge addressable market here that they can go after. We're going to see this unfold over the next few years. Okay, so recommendations for network vendors. How can you be successful with web-scale companies and outperform? It's not just web-scale, also wrap into that Wi-Fi companies. They're also spending an increasing amount of money on this infrastructure. So, be flexible. These companies want flexibility. They like to purchase customized products instead of point solutions, and they want them according to their specifications. Sometimes they will buy point solutions, but we've seen a mixture, especially with Google and Facebook. They want to use best practices, and then they want to use OEMs and pull a variety of OEMs and vendors together to package the solution for them, or they're just building it in-house. But there are opportunities to sell to these people, not only components, but also solutions wrapped around broader products and software that they're trying to implement. Consulting is a big play here. These alternative network providers and the traditional telecom operators need help, and they're going to rely more increasingly on consultants. For the alternative network providers, they want to know what are the best practices, and then they want to pull in products and services that way. This is how the vendor can increase their revenues with these companies. For the incumbent operators, it's about consulting the operators on how to transform their operations to these software-mediated technologies, and they want end-to-end outcome-based solutions. So the Tier 1 vendors are best positioned to help with these things, and also some of the leading IT service companies like IBM, HP, Accenture. These companies are going to outperform here in those particular areas. Last but not least is outsourcing. Outsourcing is helping not only incumbent operators, but also alternative network providers keep their costs in check, bend that OpEx curve downward, and huge pressure for these services. So anybody who's offering outsourcing, that's going to be a strong growth market for not only incumbents, but also these alternative network providers. So in summation, alternative network providers are disrupting the telecom business model. Incumbent telecom operators need to transform to stay relevant, and network suppliers are in an enviable position because business will increase. These are the key takeaways from this webinar. I just want to note that most of the things that we talked about today are taking place in the United States. We are not seeing a large amount of activity in alternative network providers in international markets yet. With that said, there is quite a bit of activity around dark fiber and optical transport taking place in Europe. Facebook and Google have been buying dark fiber in large quantities on that continent. And there's also some things taking place in New Zealand, Australia, Africa, and other areas of the world, but not at the same extent, not at the same level of dynamicism that we're seeing in the United States market. So essentially the way I characterize it is the U.S. is the sandbox, the testing place the lab, where these companies are tinkering with these different technologies. And then once they figure out the secret sauce and figure out a viable business model and put it in commercial use, then you're going to start seeing these business models spreading like wildfire into other markets around the world. So with that, we will open it up for Q&A.
All right, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, please send them to the Q&A function. The first question we have here is, do you think alternative network providers will engage in M&A to enhance their network asset base?
Yeah, I think we're going to see some M&A here. So expect the unexpected. I would not be surprised to see a company like Google over the next decade purchase some incumbent operators and then re-leverage that infrastructure for their own needs. Transport companies that are doing wholesale traffic, I would not be surprised to see something like that happen, especially if some companies start going into bankruptcy and they have opportunities to buy assets at fire sale prices. I definitely think you're going to see some of these things happening. We're already seeing them acquiring dark fiber in large quantities. I mean, you could even say that that's a form of M&A. Yeah.
All right. So regarding infrastructure ownership, considering Verizon, Fios, and Comcast, when do you think the likes of Google and Facebook or Amazon will own the last mile?
Okay, so great question. So Amazon is not doing this at the same extent that Google and Facebook are. Google is going last mile. Google and Facebook, the intention is to go last mile. With Google Fiber is just a piece of the puzzle. What they really need to do is figure out how do they get this space furniture idea out and commercially viable, and then they're going to have the last mile covered in large, across blanket zones of population centers.
How about security issues as a potential inhibitor to adopt Wi-Fi for this purpose?
Yeah, so for security, definitely a concern, but there are companies investing lots of money into figuring that out, and they will be figuring these things out. It's just, it just might take a little bit of time, but this is not a long-term hindrance to Wi-Fi becoming adopted. It's just table stakes type thing. They will figure out the security.
Do the retailers offer voice services via Wi-Fi already?
So the retailers don't offer the voice themselves. If you have a device that happens to be compatible with Wi-Fi calling and you're in a retail environment where you have access to that access point, then yes, you can use the voice over Wi-Fi.
What is HP's position here, and what are they selling to participate?
So HP's selling quite a bit here, or they're able to sell quite a bit here. HP is very involved in NFV and SDN. In fact, they are among the leaders in NFV, and that's going to be a big drive. They also have a consulting and systems integration organization that will be helping operators with this transformation to software-mediated technologies. HP also has Wi-Fi, so they can sell the hardware and the associated network management software necessary to manage these Wi-Fi environments.
All right. On the subject of HP, what do you think of the speculation of HP potentially buying Aruba Networks?
Yeah, so I think it makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I think that HP is recognizing that Wi-Fi has a lot of opportunity, and they're getting out ahead of that. By consolidating the Wi-Fi hardware space, they are positioning themselves for that growth. We're at the very early stages here. We have not seen yet the ubiquitous Wi-Fi coverage. We're going to see more hotspots coming out. We're going to see more densification taking place. We're at the early stages of this really becoming a ubiquitous type footprint.
How are enterprise customers trying to utilize the alternative network providers today? And are the alternative providers well positioned for the IoT? If so, how?
Okay, so enterprise customers, they are not using, they're not using the access per se. So if you look at Google Fiber, that's a consumer-only business. They're not rolling out fiber to commercial buildings yet. However, if you look at cloud, yes. The answer is yes. The investments that are taking place in the cloud on the back end, the network backbone, that does have implications for the enterprise customers that are purchasing services from those clouds. And regarding the IoT, they're positioned there. I mean, well positioned. I would say as of right now in IoT, I would say that the incumbents and the alternative network providers are on par in terms of IoT. But with that said, we're at the early stages of IoT becoming a ubiquitous type thing. We're M2M, we're going to see billions of devices connected. Right now, we're at tens of millions. I mean, there's a lot more scale that needs to come into that system. And yes, both the incumbents and the alternative guys are both going to be big players in that IoT development space.
Does net neutrality play into this? And how about municipal fiber?
Yeah, net neutrality plays into this to some extent. Municipal fiber, I mean, these are broad questions. So, yeah, I mean, Google needs to deal with the FCC with their fiber stuff. They're going to run into issues with the space furniture stuff that they're trying to do. Municipal fiber, I mean, there's a lot of regulation around these things. Net neutrality, remember, the web-scale companies, they're at the other end of what they want out of it. They want an open and free internet. That's what they want. It's the incumbents that are resisting that. So it's really a tug of war, and we'll see how that pans out. But, if the alternative network providers are in a world where the net neutrality goes against them, is it really going against them? Because then they might be able to monetize their own network infrastructure as well.
Can you speak more on what you know about alternative network providers buying dark fiber?
Yeah, so what we know now about the dark fiber is that Google and Facebook are buying large quantities of it. In some cases, they're just buying it. They're just going in and they're just saying, look, what do you got? And they'll just say, we'll take it all. All right, and they're buying it at scale. They're buying it at, because they're buying it at scale, they're getting it at very good prices. They're paying, they're paying cash, and it's just they're just going to continue buying up whatever they can with the intention that they will use it eventually. Some of it they're able to use sooner than later, but again, this is part of their grand plan of the access for all. So by having that fiber, they figure they can use it at some point in the future, even if they're not using it right now.
You've talked nicely to the need for incumbents to embrace software-mediated technologies, but how important is it for them to add new customer services and differentiated user experience?
So software-mediated technologies, it is important in the sense that it increases the flexibility of the network. It drastically reduces the time to market to bring new applications and new business models to market. Right now, it takes on average about 18 months to bring a new application into the network, and we're talking about drastically reducing that time to like a couple weeks to a couple months. That nimbleness that you can give and that scale that you're giving to the incumbent operators is a competitive advantage, and that you need to have the software-mediated ecosystem in place in order to do that.
What does this mean for the carrier-driven subsidy model, for instance, the 2-year contract? Do you see this moving more to a no-contract unlocked phone model as in Asia, and has this already begun happening?
Yeah, this has begun happening. The U.S. is a little different from other areas of the world. I think you will still have 2-year contracts, but I think that you're going to see a decline in that. like I said, there is going to be a subset of customers that like that model and that will continue to stay on that type of a service plan. However, I think that we are moving to a more prepaid type environment, but that'll play out at different rates in different markets.
SDN and NFV are pretty broad topics. What use cases should telcos focus on initially?
So, yes, they are broad topics. So virtualize the things that are easier to virtualize first. So the EPC, IMS, virtualize some of the elements that you can early on. Bend that OpEx cost curve down, get some efficiencies on the CapEx. It's going to help with cost reduction initially. You really need to have a fully virtualized network or a mostly virtualized network to get some of these use cases with a scaled, significant type impact that the telcos are going to need. So it needs to be instead of domain by domain, they might deploy it that way, but you really need to see. I really look at it as a rip and replace. All right, this is what we got for a network. We need to just start overhauling and accelerate the timeline. We need to start overhauling all of the domains, and we need to be aggressive with it. Some operators are going to be more aggressive than others. Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, those are some that are going to be more aggressive than others. AT&T is going to be very aggressive here as well. I mean, they've been very vocal about their intention to move to software-mediated technologies as part of their Domain 2.0 program. We're going to see a lot more of those type things coming out in the market, especially at MWC this year. There's going to be a lot of talk about this.
You mentioned digital advertising is fueling Google and Facebook's investments in alternative wireless technologies. However, this is mostly geared towards consumers. What could be their aspirations for enterprise customers with such technologies?
Yeah, so they're primarily going after consumers. That's the focus right now. Businesses, again, businesses is a key area where the incumbent operators are going to have a stronghold, and it's probably going to stay that way for quite a while. So I would say focus more on the consumer aspect for the alternative network guys, and the incumbents are going to have that continue to deliver that value to the enterprise and government sectors.
How are traditional vendors approaching new players?
Okay, so sometimes the operators are coming to them. I mean, it really depends on the customer. Some customers are very quiet about what they're doing, like Google. Good luck trying to get conversations with them, but they will talk to who they want to talk to when they want to talk to them. And they are talking with certain OEMs and vendors and getting help on their fiber initiatives, on some of these other initiatives. They also are approaching academia to get help, and other think tanks to get help on some of these issues, some of these challenges that they're trying to solve.
All right, and when do you think Comcast and other cable operators will come out with their own Wi-Fi service?
Yeah, so Comcast. So I strongly encourage you all to read Comcast's transcript from this past quarter's earnings. They did talk a little bit about Wi-Fi, and if you imply what they're trying to say there, and if you extrapolate some of the things that we're seeing in the market, what they're doing, it looks like late this year to next year they're going to come out with their own Wi-Fi service. So that's going to be, it's going to be at a much bigger scale than what Freewheel is, which Cablevision is offering right now.
What does this dramatic change mean to the current customer care models? What changes should outsourcing vendors make to align to the change?
So at the end of the day, customers are going to have the same issues, similar issues. So regardless of who's providing the access, the types of questions you're going to get are going to be similar. So I don't see a huge disruption there. I just see for call center outsourcers, I would say it's just going to be different customers that you're working with, different clients. But at the end of the day, what you're doing in the field, interfacing with the end users, that's not going to be a whole lot different.
What role will small cells play in this huge Wi-Fi scenario?
So we're seeing small cells with Wi-Fi built in. The incumbent telcos are deploying these, and the intention is if the cellular network gets overloaded, we can backhaul it through the Wi-Fi, or offload it through the Wi-Fi rather. Honestly, I think Wi-Fi infrastructure spend is going to outpace small cells. I think that we're going to see an inflection point in a couple of years where Wi-Fi is going to become the de facto preferred method of using communication technologies, and I think that it's going to be at the detriment to small cells. Now, with that said, small cells are still huge. Okay, they're going to be deployed at scale, and they're going to be a strong driver for vendors and a key part of the strategies for incumbent telecom operators. But with that said, I think that you're going to see much faster growth and much bigger addressable market in Wi-Fi.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. Earlier you mentioned HP's position and what they were selling to participate. What about IBM?
Yeah, so IBM on the services end and the software end. IBM has their cloud platform software. They are also have the consulting and systems integration arm, and they have OSS, BSS, and some other telecom software that they can bring to bear, basically helping with transformation. IBM's usually seen as a thought leader, as at the cutting edge of some of these major transformational shifts in the market. So they're going to be a key shortlisted player to helping with the transformation aspect, not only for the incumbent operators, but also for the alternative network providers.
All right, and that's all we have for time and for questions. So thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for your questions. You can follow both Chris and TVR on the Twitter handles listed here, and please check out our pages on SlideShare and YouTube as well. Yeah,
I just want to say, just want to reiterate that this slide deck will be on SlideShare with the complete recording. And if anybody's interested in that market landscape report, give me a buzz, and we'll see if you can get you some information on that.
All right, and lastly, before you guys sign off, we'd like to ask you to take a brief survey about today's webinar. As we research the performance of technology companies, we're also studying how we help our clients, and your feedback will be greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function open for another 5 minutes or so to for folks to ask any last-minute questions. Other than that, we'll see you next time. Thank you.